Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince movie review. At the risk of repeating myself from my previous reviews of the Harry Potter movies, the whole Harry Potter franchise is an interesting cultural phenomenon. The movies make huge money for the studios. This one even broke records, which is quite a feat when you consider that none of the movies are really all that good, at least standing alone as movies. Now, don't understand me, they're very faithful adaptations of the book, and they act as a nice tribute to the book. But if you compare them to the blockbuster movies of the past, Star Wars or Indiana Jones or what have you, then it's obvious by comparison that in the Harry Potter movies, the pacing is all wrong, the plot isn't streamlined enough, and the climaxes are in the wrong places. The experience of watching these movies is a lot different than, say, watching Star Wars. The original Star Wars, at least, which was deliberately designed as a tour de force of cinematic storytelling. In other words, the Harry Potter movies are movies that are based on books, and they feel like movies that are based on books. But even though they're not great movies, the books have become such a cultural phenomenon that even non-Harry Potter fans feel obliged to see the movie just to find out what all the fuss is about. And I count myself among that group. I originally was not a fan of the Harry Potter books. I was a little bit too old to have grown up with them. I saw the movies in theaters just because they were big cultural phenomenons that everyone was seeing. And then after seeing the first 4 movies, I decided to go back and read the books because at that point I was getting interested enough in the story. And so the buzz from the books brings people to the movies, and then the movies convert people to the books, and the buzz behind the books gets greater, and the cycle just continues. Speaking of these books, I've been re-listening to them on audiobook recently, the Harry Potter books. It strikes me that the brilliance of the Harry Potter series is that it takes many elements that are usually reserved for adult literature and makes them accessible for young readers, such as careful plotting, character development, and an eye for detail. And perhaps more importantly, conversation that flows naturally. And the major plot points of the story are always revealed in dialogue, rather than told through the narrator's voice. This is a big difference than a lot of the children's books I remember from my own childhood, where the plot seemed to come from the voice of the narrator. In the Harry Potter books, it all comes through the dialogue. Unfortunately, the movies, by their very nature, have to be streamlined. So a lot of this stuff that made the books so wonderful just has to get cut out. All that being said, I like this movie. It did a good job of condensing the story and bringing it to the screen. It's 2.5 hours long, which felt a bit long to sit through. And yet, when it ended, I couldn't help but feel sorry for all the things that they cut out. Well, such is always the case with movies based on books. For example, these Harry Potter movies have assembled a very impressive cast of actors. It's a shame that as the story progresses, each of them gets so little screen time. The child actors who play the Hogwarts students, now almost all grown into adults, but still passable as teenagers, do such a good job, but many of them have just been reduced to brief cameos as the story progresses. Again, not true in the book, but true in the movies. A lot of these characters just have very brief walk-on parts just to remind us that the character still exists, but then there's no time for them to do anything more. The adult actors are even more brilliant and even more criminally underused. Alan Rickman is perfect as Snape, and I think this is actually a case where the movie is better than the book. Alan Rickman brings more life into Snape, the movie character, than we get from Snape, the book character. I mean, we get to spend more time with Snape in the books, but I think Alan Rickman does a better job of making him seem like a real three-dimensional character. But as in the past few movies, we just get brief glimpses of Snape. It's a pity because he's becoming more and more important to the plot as these movies go on, and yet we get to see less and less of him. Robbie Coltrane, Ralph Fiennes, Helen Bonham Carter, and so on all do such a great job. It's a pity we get to see so little of them. Now, as for the plot and the pacing, the beginning of the movie did a good job of setting the tone, reintroducing us to all the characters, and establishing the story. Even though they had a lot of material to cover, they did this in a way that didn't feel rushed. Unfortunately, it's the end of the movie that suffers as a result of this, where key plot points that should have had a more dramatic reveal are just rushed through. Now, I know movies are written in advance and then typically filmed all out of order, but still, one gets the impression watching this movie of the production staff saying, "Oh no, we've only got 30 minutes left to conclude this thing. Quick, just rush through everything else." I mean, I know that's not what they did, but that's what it feels like, because boy, that ending feels like they're just rushing through plot points as quickly as possible. There were also a few missed notes. The destruction of the bridge at the beginning of the movie was an event whose significance was explained in the book, but never explained in the movie. In the movie, we just see the bridge being destroyed, and then it's on to the next scene. Now, I know this provided a bit of an excitement for the opening of the movie, but I feel like it's something they should have just cut out, since it had no relation to anything that happened in the rest of the movie. Other events, on the other hand, are underplayed. For example, the identity of the Half-Blood Prince was a reveal that was a big dramatic point in the book. But it ended up just being mentioned in an offhanded way in the movie, with very little drama at all. The action scenes in these Harry Potter movies always seem to suffer a bit. And in the last couple of movies, the action scenes have just consisted of people pointing wands and yelling things. And I know it's a movie about wizards who point wands and yell things, but I can't help but feel with a little bit more dramatic choreography, you could have made these scenes a lot more exciting. The battle between Harry and Malfoy in the bathroom, for example, was pretty lackluster. And along the same lines, the ending of this scene, in which Harry Potter, who's experimenting with a new spell, ends up horribly injuring Malfoy, was a huge dramatic point in the book, but seemed really underplayed in the movie. Now, the climax of this movie is also rather bizarre. It's Dumbledore has to drink down an entire potion. It is, to be fair, straight out of the book, but it doesn't work in a movie. I remember reading this in the book and thinking to myself, this is an odd scene. It may work on print. It's never going to work as a dramatic scene in a movie. I really hope they cut this out or find an alternate way to do this for the movie. But they didn't. They filmed it just as it was in the book. On the other hand, there's this huge big battle in the school in Hogwarts at the end of the book, which I was expecting to be a huge climactic point in the movie, and they just cut it out completely. Now, I know these movies have a lot of ground to cover and they have to cut out a lot, but this is the big climactic battle at the end. And this is a big blockbuster Hollywood movie, right? So I was thinking you got to have this big climax. I would certainly have sat through it. Like, I would have stayed in the theater an extra 15 minutes to see the climax. But no, they just cut it out. I suppose it's to the credit of the storytelling power that these Harry Potter movies have turned into such a big franchise, and they're so confident in their storytelling that they don't even need the big action finish at the end. They know they've got the audience hooked either way. But personally, I would have been willing to sit through another 10